Estamos en la conferencia de prensa de otro de nuestros homenajeados, el maestro Egoyan. Le cedo la palabra a la Soria.
Hola, ¿qué tal? What an amazing honor is to be sitting here. Not just from the perspective of being the director of the festival and the name of my whole team of the city of Los Cabos, but in a personal way, it's really, it's a privilege to have you here. I admire your cinema since I can remember. And I don't even think an hour is going to be enough to discuss so many films and stuff. You've been a landmark in American international cinema, not just Canadian. It's an honor to screen Exotica. I know you've talked with my programmer, and we will both agree that that was the best way to. I mean, being such a short festival, it's a challenge when we do a tribute. You know, to pick something that is representative. There are so many voices in your cinema, so many ways to understand it, so many ways to approach it. But Exotica, it's a film that really speaks of your art, of your speech, of everything. And The Captive, having the Latin American premiere of The Captive, it's an honor, and I thank you personally. I don't know, but please tell us a little bit more about, well, first your experience here in Cabos. I think it's important to hear. You've been here for a few days already.
Well, it's not working. But we were just saying, it's a very unique place to have a festival, but also it's a wonderful concentration because people can come here and relax, but also it's very well curated. At a just purely personal level, I got to do something yesterday which I've never done, which is deep sea fishing, and that was really amazing. I've never had this experience of feeling this force from a string go deep into the water and not knowing what I'm pulling in. And gradually through this effort, seeing this form emerge and seeing it then leap out of the water, it's a very, very powerful experience. As someone who's really interested in how we draw out narratives and how we draw out stories, this seemed to be a very physical realization of some sort of primal force. So it was really beautiful, like really amazing. I really love this idea of a festival that's concentrated and which allows people to have discussions and relax and not have the pressures of a large festival. So it's beautiful to be here. I think we're in a very wonderful time of year, location, so I think it will grow. And of course the reputation and people speaking about it will enhance. So I congratulate you. It's really, really wonderful to be here.
Thank you very much. Coming from you, it's one of the greatest things I've heard so far. Your cinema has so many ways to approach it, so many angles. In a way, I've always admired the fact that you are first and foremost someone who explores through the camera, not just through narrative, but through technicalities in cinema, through formats. You know, the way we relate to the screen is very important in the cinema.
Yes, sure. Yes, I mean, there's nothing casual to me about the act of making images. It's very, there's an intention behind every time a camera is looking at something. I'm very obsessed with the process of depiction, how things are shown. So you could say that these are formalist issues, but I'm also trying to connect them to emotional issues in these characters' lives. Very often they are characters who are self-conscious. They are characters who are somehow out of touch with a sense of where and how they belong to something, either because of a trauma or because of something that they're trying to understand. So the camera is a way of expressing how they feel about themselves. And sometimes, in the earlier films especially, the camera is about the embodiment of a missing person that they are thinking of, that they are imagining themselves being watched. This is, again, something that I'm using in the new film, Remember, which is a very old technique that I haven't used since my first features, which is that the character is aware of being watched all the time. So I think that this is, the feeling that you get in many of my films is this self-consciousness, and that condition interests me a lot, where people somehow are trying to place themselves, that they've lost the position of the narrative of their life, and they're trying to reorient and reposition. And maybe this is because of my own experience as an immigrant coming to the country at a very young age, trying to understand how I fit in, being very aware of how you construct yourself to become a normal person. I'm not sure, but this is something, sometimes I try and escape this idea and I try and shoot casually without thinking too much, but it always comes down to this question of depiction. And I think you can divide filmmakers into two types. The filmmakers who are taking a very natural approach to what they shoot, and the filmmakers who are taking a more formal approach, and who are trying to understand this expressive aspect of the camera as an instrument of watching. And every decision about what it's watching, why it's watching, how it's watching, becomes part of the construction of the movie.
I believe that you just mentioned something that is so important about my experience of watching your cinema, because not just through the camera or through the screen or the lenses, but just the action of watching, how much implications has, right? Psychologically, sexually, how much in your films, Exotica is a fantastic example. All the explorations about voyeurism, about watching but not touching. The same thing happens in The Captive in a way. The villain in The Captive has this, and it's not just through people that have psychological problems or anything. We all are part of that. Well, the stuff that we love, that we watch, we are obsessed with it, but we cannot touch.
Right.
The same thing happens with the dancer in Exotica. The same thing happens with the captive in The Captive. Tell us more about it. This.
Well, it comes from there are a number of films that inspired me at a really early point. Films like Vertigo, films like The Conversation, a great Mexican film by Buñuel called The Criminal Life of Archibald de la Cruz, which again is dealing with this notion of a fetishization, this notion of an intense concentration on something that overwhelms you, and which has some sort of association to your past that you don't understand at a conscious level. So there are actions that we take which are that we understand, and other things that we are trying to comprehend, but which begin to govern our behavior. So I think The Captive is a really interesting example of these three couples. There's the parents who have lost this child and are spending 8 years trying to understand what might have happened to her, but are playing out this almost ritualized process of mourning her loss. And there's the couple who are the detectives who are involved in the practical act of trying to retrieve her. And then there's, of course, the couple, which is the captor and the captive, the pedophile who has stolen this girl as an 8-year-old, and now she's an adult. So he's lost any sexual interest in her, but is still bound to her in this way that's very disturbing. And it might be that he's bound to her because of this channel that he's created for her. In most cases where there's an abduction, the captor breaks any contact with the parents. He he applies his power by saying, I'm the only person in your life. Your parents don't care. It's just me. But he's done something very strange. He's created this conduit that she has towards the mother.
Yeah.
And it's possible that he has become also obsessed with this channel for his own reason. And he's asking her to tell stories, and he's become addicted to this process of, it's a sadistic pleasure, but it's a pleasure of watching someone else's sadness, someone else's mourning. And of course, there must be a reason why he's behaving this way. We don't know why, but this governs his action. In Exotica, this strange ritual of a father who has lost, again, a daughter, going into a club, this relationship he has with one dancer, this schoolgirl uniform, and what they're playing out at a psychosexual level. These characters don't understand why they're there, but they're compelled to be there every night. And psychologists have a term for what they call faulty mourning. This is a type of mourning or a type of therapy sometimes that we create for ourselves that we think is dealing with the pain, but in fact it's only enhancing the pain, it's making the pain more extreme, because it's not being controlled or supervised by a professional, by a therapist. And we get caught up in these situations, and they're traps. We don't know any way out of it. So it's an extreme psychological place, but that's where the films have, some of them have found themselves.
I really also, there's another angle in which your films have always interested me. The way you approach communities through usually there's something dramatic that happens, and I love how you always explore the cultural or community dimensions of it. It not just happens like the girl who dies in Exotica, but in The Sweet Hereafter with the school bus crash. In the captivity it's the same thing. In a way, the captivity, like this girl abducted, changes the community. And it's for us a very interesting. I mean, as a foreign, as Mexican guy watching Canadian cinema, because it's a different way how the Canadian communities behave. There's a sense of everyone in your community. It's a trauma for everyone in a way. It really interests me how the dimensions that you explore in this way.
Yes, but on the other hand, what's interesting about these films, they're dealing with community, but they're not naturalistic communities. For instance, in The Sweet Hereafter, we never really see everyone together. We see it in a prismatic way, as the lawyer goes from one household to the other. And in our imagination, we form a community. But we never see all these people together. There's one brief scene at the beginning with a country fair, but very brief. And then we have this scene at the end, which is in a community hall, where the lawyer is when they're making the deposition, but it's empty. So we know that community events were held here. There was celebration, but we don't see it. And I think that also in The Captive, you know that there must be a huge media community around the disappearance of this girl, but we don't see that. And in fact, the police station that the father is taken to at the beginning, it's not a normal police station. He's taken to a satellite station where they deal with child exploitation. So there's something wrong about the place that he's in. Even the interrogation room, there's toys, there's objects around, which are not what you would expect. So we know that there must be a community of people who are concerned, but we don't see that. We're seeing these individuals. And there's something quite, I would say, expressionistic about it. And maybe the one time I've tried to create a real community was one of the weaker films. It was a Devil's Knot, where I'm trying to actually show this real community of West Memphis in 1992. And and there's something that it's not, if I was to be critical, it's not quite me, you know, like it's I'm much more interested in these individuals and their loneliness in a place where there should be a community. So Sweet Hereafter, I think ultimately it's about Nicole, the Sarah Pauli character, understanding how alone she is. And the major change when I did the adaptation from the book is that there's a whole group of lawyers who are coming into this town trying to create legal cases. But when I did the adaptation, I took away this community of lawyers as well. It's just one lawyer. And it's concentrated. I'm very interested in the concentrated expression of emotional trauma. You know, that at that point you don't necessarily feel the community because you're so consumed in your own sorrow.
It's something that it's interesting when you mentioned the personal trauma, that dimension of your films. We had Gernia Kent a few days ago, Sayedland yesterday, and both were speaking at some point on the fact that, well, in Canada, everything works, right? Like, we have that sense, Denis would say, like, we've never had a war, we never participated in something like that. I mean, in our films, guns and explosions and stuff, they don't fit because, in a way, that's not our reality. We have to reflect inside, to go inside. But something that is interesting about yours and your approach is that many times like someone like takes off the lid because we see all these personal dramas in a place that it seems that everything is going fantastic. You live in such a privileged country. I mean, I lived in Canada for some time, and the fact that your like most primal resources are taken care of, right? You have security, you have nature. So many things that in other places are not, covered. But you are a foreign person in a way as well. So your approach, I think, it has it's personal as well.
Yes, I mean, at one level, yes, you're absolutely right. I think Denis is right that we're very blessed with amazing natural resources. We have a functioning multicultural society. We're not beset with violence on a day-to-day basis. However, The Captive is inspired by this very disturbing real-life situation. There was a community in a city just north of Toronto called Cornwall, and about many years ago, these victims all came forward and said that they had been abused by these senior figures in the community, judges and police officers and priests, and they all had the same story. And this began the most expensive and costly public inquiry in the province's history to find out what was the nature of this ring, this pedophile ring. And after many years, and over $50 million, this was a public inquiry that was very, very extensive. They came to the conclusion that they weren't sure. They couldn't say that there was a ring or that there was not a ring. And I found that this was so disturbing that these victims were all saying this happened. And they were all telling the same story of where this event took place and how the people were dressed. And it didn't make sense, and yet it's just been forgotten about. It was public, and then it disappeared. Yet the victims remain. And what's incredible is that there was one police officer whose name was Terry Dunlop, who became crazy with this. He said, this happened. And he was completely ostracized by his community. And he was completely relegated to this town where he's alone now. The victims think that he's a saint because he's the only person who believes them. And he doesn't even want to testify because he thinks that no one will listen to him anyhow. This to me is a fascinating So this is the other side of the Canadian system, maybe that we can allow something as monumental as this we will put it through the justice system, we will inquire, but we don't come to a conclusion. We don't want to, we don't want to, I'm not quite sure what the answer is, what we don't want to do. But it's as though we can just keep it in this very unresolved place. That's why in Captive, the two detectives are called Cornwall and Dunlop, because and what began to obsess me as I was writing this film was this idea of living in a place where you don't know what the rules are. You're not quite sure how far the tentacles of this society go. You're not quite sure what they're watching, why they're watching, what they're sharing. Of course, I can't show child pornography in a film, but I wanted to create that sense of sadism and this pleasure in seeing innocence completely destroyed. So this channel is created with the mother and the pedophile, and it's all an attempt to examine another aspect of our Canadian culture, which is appearance. We have a very strong sense of how we like to present ourselves to the world, but there's another side to it. There's something that I feel is being repressed, that's being contained. And maybe that's good, maybe that's the civilization. I mean, that's, if you're a Freudian, that's the basic, pressure, is trying to maintain a civilized approach to our outlook. But of course that creates repression as well. And the new film, remember, is a very extreme study of this repression. And because repression leads to suppression, where something hasn't happened in your own mind if you deny it for long enough time. I'm sure these are very complicated answers. I hope it's communicated.
No, I really love that you mentioned Remember. I take the opportunity to invite everyone later to the masterclass of Mr. Adam Egoyan about Remember. For many reasons, we picked to do this masterclass not just because it's such an honor to have it hosted by Cameron Bailey, who's the director of the Toronto Film Festival, and especially for having the opportunity to discuss a film that it's a powerful film, and just in terms of production, going first further, it's a co-production between Germany and Canada, but it has some financing involvement of US financiers and Mexican financiers, which makes it for us a good opportunity that falls into the axis of the festival, Mexico, US, and Canada. Tell us a little bit about it. How did that come together?
Well, it came together. I mean, again, I think the producers will talk about that at the workshop, how it came together. It's a very interesting story about technically how it came together and how it was structured ultimately as a co-production. And I'll leave that to the producers to talk about, because we have a problem that we can only, for Canadian film, it has to be a Canadian screenplay, and this was an American screenplay. So how we were able to structure it is complex, but it's worth analyzing in the workshop. How it came together for me was just reading a script which was just so original, so unusual, and created a character which is quite unique. And then being able to imagine one of the finest actors in the world playing this. Christopher Plummer, someone who I worked with many years ago in Anarak, the film I made in 2002, and knowing as I was reading it that this was the person who had to play the role. In fact, it came with his name attached, so that it was immediately exciting. But it's rare that you read something where you understand that all these themes that we're talking about. I mean, one of the things that makes my own writing, gives it its flavor, is the structure of the storytelling, the use of chronology, the use of time. A film like Captive is moving very freely back and forth in time over 8 years, and the viewer is often lost. The viewer is feeling that they're putting together pieces of a puzzle, maybe even an investigation. They're creating their own criminal investigation as they're watching the film, trying to collect evidence and form a coherent narrative. What's amazing to me about Remember is that it's a completely linear story. And from the moment I read it, I felt that it was the first time I had read a linear story that somehow embodied all of these themes that we're talking about now. It allowed me to explore all of this material, but really in the very simple relationship of a camera and a performance. The structure was pristine. It was absolutely clear as it moves from point A to point B. But it was really about just concentrating on the nuance of performance. And this is what got me excited. And in terms of how it was put together financially, I'll leave that to the producers because it's a story in itself. It really is a complicated co-production.
It's a fantastic project. I love the text. I read it some time ago. I'm not to spoil anything, just so our audience knows what we're talking about. Remember is a story about the character of Christopher Plummer, which is a Jewish person in an old home, assistance home, that goes into a Nazi hunt in a way.
Right. Well, it's about an older man who is suffering from early stages dementia, who believes that he's found the person responsible for killing his family. And he goes on this journey, but he keeps forgetting why. He keeps forgetting what he's looking for, why he's looking. And his whole journey is actually structured by this other character. And I just don't want to give the story away because it's so amazing and so original. But you're right, this is what we think the story is about. That's all I'm saying. Yeah.
No, what I like about it is that it explores another traumatic event, like historically traumatic event, right? You mentioned Ararat, which is something similar. You explore the Romanian diaspora and everything. What's your, not obsession, but interest in this type of traumatic, like historical events that changes societies entirely?
Well, again, it goes back to this question that we were speaking of before, which is faulty mourning. Again, that expression is very complex, but it's primal to what I'm doing. Faulty means that it's not functioning properly. So it's the process of mourning and grief, but you're not really experiencing it in a way that's going to move you forward. And tied into this is this process of denial. Denial is very interesting to me because denial is where you construct a truth that you believe is coherent and which answers certain questions, but is involved in the process of repression. So in Ararat, of course, as an Armenian, my whole experience is defined by the denial of the perpetrator to address and to acknowledge this genocide. So that's ongoing. It's now 2015 will be the 100th anniversary of the Armenian genocide. And you can be sure that you'll be hearing a lot of information from the Turkish government about how this never happened, how it's all a lie, how there weren't that many Armenians in Turkey at the time, that in fact the Armenians massacred the Turks. I mean, it goes on. It's quite extraordinary. 100 years later, we're still in this really perverse struggle to ascertain a reality which is completely obvious. There's no, and in fact, in Canada and many other countries, it's been officially recognized. Every scholar of Holocaust and genocide has ascertained that this was a classic genocide, and yet the perpetrator has been allowed to deny it. So that experience has been very important to me. And I think that in the case of what is happening in Remember, again, without giving it away, we're dealing with a character who is in complete denial over this historic event of Holocaust. And it's so difficult to talk about it without giving it away. But it's someone who when we watch the film, when the film finishes, you have to analyze what you've just seen. You have to go back over the entire movie and think about what you just experienced, because by the end of it, you understand that you've been exposed to a character you would never want to spend time with, but who is a human being. That's all I can say. I've already said too much.
That's a great way to say it. Thank you very much, Adam. It's really a privilege and honor to have you here. I think it gives us an opportunity to open the floor to some questions of the media. And welcome to Los Cabos. This is your home.
Okay.
Hola. Hola, ¿qué tal? Omar de Televisa. Un par de preguntas. La primera, ¿le gustan los tributos? Se le va a rendir uno. ¿Cómo se siente con ellos? Una caricia al ego, obviamente. Y la segunda, el cine como vehículo a veces de denuncia social debe de transmitir algo, de dejar algún mensaje. En ese sentido, captiva, me parece muy interesante la idea. ¿Qué le gustaría que el público se llevara de su película? Es el manejo de cómo los padres dejan a sus hijos frente a la tecnología, frente a redes sociales, como lo muestran ahí. Y es cierto que en los países más desarrollados, este tipo de casos de pedofilia son más altos.
Well, pedophilia is a condition that we've had as part of our human makeup. It's an aberration, but it is persistent. It's not going to go away. There's a certain type of adult that will always find the attraction to children, and yet, as a community, we have a duty to protect our children because this is an extraordinarily corrosive and very damaging, experience. So, in a highly the problem with the internet is that in the 70s and 80s. There was a lot of work done to stop the flow of child pornography. That the physical transmission of photographs and films of child abuse was actually coming under control. That laws were put into place, and there was all types of restrictions that made it more difficult, if not impossible, to trade in child pornography. And then the internet arrived. And suddenly, all the efforts that were made disappeared because there was this free flow of horrifying images, and those images never go away. So this is an incredibly disturbing condition of our world. It is a plague. It is, and when Rosario Dawson's character says at the beginning, it's like finding a needle in a haystack, we have to remember that there are millions of images of child abuse that are easily available on the internet, and that those victims are often never found. They continue to live in these families where they are being abused, and that's being traded. And at a certain point, when they become adults, that stops. But those images persist, and the trauma persists. And I think at some level, the film is also just to make people aware of that reality. It's very disturbing, but it's part of our contemporary world. And we do have police detectives who are dealing with it, but we also have to remember, and the film makes this clear, it's a very disturbing scene, I'm not sure about other countries, but in Canada, where we are at the leading edge of some of these investigations, the police have a law which says that they cannot use children in their investigation or images of children. And that raises a very, very disturbing question, which is, in any pedophile ring, you cannot enter the ring unless you are trading images, new images of children. But if an investigator can't bring that, I don't know how they do their job. In any undercover drug operation or any other underworld sort of activity, there is drugs that are exchanged. The undercover police are able to trade in the actual material to gain the trust of the gang or the cartel that they're trying to infiltrate. That's not the case with child pornography. So I don't technically know. Even after all of the investigation and interview and research that I did, we had great cooperation from the sex crimes unit in the province. They would not tell me how to do their job. All they can tell me is that they spend a lot of time on a computer screen looking at the details of the room, trying to understand where the crime scene is, and trying to penetrate that particular reality of horror. But that's not really explaining the complexity of the job. So we have a scene where a police officer, played by Scott Speakman, goes rogue, where he uses his niece as bait. Very disturbing scene, but actually I understand why he would have to do that if he's that obsessed. Because otherwise he doesn't get into this subculture. Oh, sorry.
Hola.
Sorry, what was the other question? Look, these types of tributes are so flattering. It's a real honor, and I always feel so privileged. And I'm always wondering if I'm fully taking advantage of this amazing position I have to speak to such intelligent, curious people and say the right things. So I was all this morning. I was so nervous. I was thinking, how do I express myself? Ultimately I express myself by making films. I'm not an academic. I'm not a lecturer. I'm not someone who is a public speaker. I think I've learned how to do it as best I can. But ultimately, my statement is made in the cinema I do. It's not made in what I'm saying. And I think there are critics and people who talk about my cinema who are much more articulate than I am. And sometimes I have to confess I'm actually repeating what they have written about my work.
A mí me gustaría que me platicara qué tan difícil es para usted pues hacer cine con temas sociales a su manera y también cómo le llegan esos temas sociales, que hay preocupaciones o cuál es su intención de llevarlos a la pantalla.
You get to these topics because a story affects you, and you wonder about the human beings that are caught in this situation. And sometimes it's very simple. You have to be moved by this circumstance because you have to devote 2 years of your life. You have to convince so many other people to come on this journey. You have to be able to be passionate about why this story needs to be told. And very often it's because something has been hidden, that there's something that's not explored. And you feel that because of your own obsessions and interests that you can provide a perspective on this. And you hope that will be urgent, that will feel necessary to the watcher. That when the person is watching this, they will feel that there is a sense of urgency, and also that it's original, that you're using your particular gifts, and you're finding the actors who can find another dimension of this story. So it's a complex process because sometimes there's a story that you're interested in, but after a month you realize you're not that interested in it, or that there's someone who you feel could tell it better than you. This is also another part, is that I need to feel, this is maybe just me, I have to feel that I have a particular perspective on it, which no one else might have. There are filmmakers who don't torture themselves with this idea that it has to be original. But if I don't feel that it's an original perspective, I somehow lose my own passion about it. So each of the films I've made, I think it's offering a particular perspective on that social condition. Sometimes I get into trouble. I mean, when I made Ararat, I think many Armenians were very confused about why I made the film this way. And yet, it was the only way I could make the film. So, I'm not saying that my perspective is going to always be the most popular or the most easily understood, but it is my perspective. It is always my approach.
Hola, Mr. Egoyan, en sus películas regularmente hablamos de una perversión de la inocencia. Vemos cómo la inocencia es pervertida, ya sea por accidentes, ya sea por hechos más dramáticos, personales. ¿De qué manera usted se involucra para hacer este tipo de películas de manera emocional? ¿Y de qué forma usted sale de ello? ¿En qué forma se cura usted emocionalmente después de presentar esos hechos en pantalla?
Well, I think this is the question. Is it an accident? Is it fate? Is it chance? I mean, for the victim, it often is. For the victim, it is an accident. They happen to be in this place. This happened to them, and they had no control. But very often, there's someone who constructs that horror. There's someone who is actually very specific. I think we see this in The Captive very clearly. And the camera actually tells you this, that there's this determination. It's a very determined accident. And when the girl disappears, she had no control over it. The father had no control over it. It's really tragic that this man is suffering from this decision that he made to leave the girl alone in the car, and yet at the moment, as a parent, we completely understand why. She's 9 years old, he's in a safe place, there's no one around. Why would he not leave her in this car? And yet, we understand, again, by the camera angle, by the music, by the way that scene is depicted, that there's something incredibly malevolent and threatening about this place, but he can't see it. He's not aware of it. And it's imposed on him. And I think from that moment you understand that the camera, either the pedophile's camera or my camera, is actually saying that there is some idea of fate, that this is unfolding specifically because a natural narrative is being disrupted. So your question is very important. At what point is anything innocent when it's being represented? The moment something is being photographed and the moment it's being shown, somehow it's being robbed of its innocence. Its innocent state is not to be observed. The moment something is observed, it's not naive anymore. And sometimes, and this is, I think, what's so troubling about voyeurism, the object is not aware of how their innocence has been robbed.
How do you heal when you make the movie?
Sorry?
In which way do you heal yourself after making a movie about like Captive, like Swift Hereafter?
Well, the question is, how do I heal myself?
Yes.
I don't know about myself, but I try and find that the characters find some way of taking control
In both The Sweet Hereafter and in Captive, the young woman in both films is able to take control of a situation that she was helpless in before. In the case of Nicole in The Sweet Hereafter, she's able to completely reorient this criminal investigation to determine her own needs. And you can say she's very selfish, and you can say that she's not thinking about the community, but she's responding to a primal sense of how she has to heal herself. And in the case of Cassandra in The Captive, she has learned from the pedophile. She has learned a way of operating and a way of controlling reality, which gives her the opportunity to determine her own escape. And that has to be incredibly vindicating for her. I mean, it has to make her feel empowered by the end of the film.
Thank you very much, Mr. Egoyan. It was a privilege to have you here. Welcome to Los Cabos.